I'm not going to be so improper as to ask whether either of you have direct personal experience of these kind of cosmetic procedures. It would be an improper thing to ask. But certainly, Kwasi...
We all know the phrase we're not going to use, though, obviously.
But we'll all know from... Kwasi will know from his constituency.
Yes.
I'm sure you've had cases. I mean, this has been around for a long time, hasn't it? These rogue operators, people getting into terrible trouble, huge cost to the NHS. It's slightly odd that it's taken us so long. Even now, the government's only consulting.
Well, a lot of the time, people used to go abroad, and they still do, to get these operations. And the couple of cases I saw as a constituency MP were cases of people who'd gone to, I think it was Turkey, both of the people, and they'd had these operations. And, of course, they'd survived, obviously, because they'd come to see me, but the operations had gone wrong. And so they had recurring issues with the cosmetic surgery.
And what do they come to see you for?
Well, they want to complain, they want to have some sort of redress. Not much an MP can do, particularly if it's a foreign operation. But it was something that was definitely came up. It's
interesting because we've been asking for people at home to get in touch, and even though it's only 32 minutes past 6, lots of you have already, because I know it's a hot topic. Terry says here, which marks your point, Kwasi, one way not yet tried to get rid of the cowboy practitioners would be a law stating that the NHS would no longer provide free treatment for botched procedures, particularly those done abroad. These individuals knew they would have to pay the NHS for repair work, then many non-regulated providers would quickly disappear. I mean, it seems like a harsh way to do it, but what do you think of that?
I think there's got to be some approach which is going to actually work and solve the problem. And I think that should definitely be looked at, because a lot of the botched operations abroad had to be dealt with by the NHS on taxpayers' pounds. And also, I think there are people, as you say, there are rogue operators here in this country who need to be held to account.
And, you know, it costs a huge amount of money for the NHS to put things right. I mean, it may be cheaper to have the procedure, but you're talking into the tens, £15,000 for every time the NHS has to step in and repair something which has gone wrong.
And just on that, just quickly, I mean, the case I looked at, or the constituent that came to me, she had repeated operations to fix this problem. That was the issue, is that obviously there was a botched operation, but then, you know, the initial treatment to sort it out didn't work. So there were repeat operations that were done on the NHS at a great expense.
The mainstreaming of cosmetic surgery is something that actually really surprises me. So when I see people who've had visible signs of cosmetic surgery, it shocks me to a certain degree, because when I was young, somebody who had something like the idea of, say, a Pamela Anderson, and I'm hoping that I've got this right. Pamela Anderson was a pin-up or so at the time, but she became almost like this person, almost like a Mayflower of the boob job at the time also. And it was, even as a young boy, I thought, this is a bit surprising also that these people go under some degree of knife or surgery. But that was, I think it was fairly out there and shocking to all of us, but now it's become very mainstream.
And the reason it's become mainstream is the problem, because it is clinics up and down your high street with people who have probably never handled an injection in their lives, and they did a bit of waxing and a little bit of other beauty treatment. Then all of a sudden, because it's so lucrative, that they then thought, well, why not? The why not bit of it is
and as often is the case. I mean, social media is driving this.
Indeed, absolutely.
I mean, this is a completely different world to 20 years ago.
But I wonder whether, if they're just saying it needs to be, there are certain procedures that will need to be with somebody who is medically trained for the Brazilian butt lift, which is obviously a very serious procedure.
That's dangerous,
But I also wonder whether, is it enough, if this consultation leads to this, that it's local authority licensing for those who want to do fillers and anti-wrinkle treatments? I mean, I'm not sure that that's strong enough either.
But what could you do? I mean, there's got to be some local engagement and control over people, you know, operating on a local basis. And I'm not sure, you know, what else you can do.
That is where our experienced regulators are in terms of making sure that shops are complying. And you know, we're talking about beauty parlours here.
I think if you go into a restaurant, you get the 5-star thing and it tells you 0 to 5 as in terms of hygiene and everything else. You go into all these sorts of cosmetic surgery places, so you don't really know anything. You're pretty much basically, they might have a slick advert on social media, you don't know anything about the doctor or anything else, and then you could potentially find yourself in serious trouble. But some of the cosmetic surgery also is a lot more dangerous than others, like the BBL, for example, particularly, which I've actually seen adverts pop into my feed about liquid BBL.
Really?
So I hope that's not saying something about my algorithm. But what's interesting is that you then see it.
You know your phone's listening. It'll carry on now. We'll all be getting them today.
So you then see those adverts there, and they're targeting very young, preciously young people, young girls in particular, who are still very impressionable about how they're going to look as women.
Yeah.
And I think it's stuff that there has to be wholesale regulation on the advertising of it, and also in particular the performance of it.
It's tough, isn't it? I mean, look, this is something which is which men have, as well as different procedures.
But the pressure on women
we don't need at this early in the morning
higher.
to go into the detail of the procedures men may choose. But all of us have young daughters.
Yes.
And it's hard to live in a society where our daughters feel there is a pressure.
Sure, yeah, no, you're right. So look,
and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the local, just going back to local licensing, I think you have to have some degree of local control.
Why does it take such a long consultation then? I mean, if that seems so obvious,
I agree.
why not just bring that? I mean, what kind of consultation would lead to somebing somebody saying, "Oh no, don't do that"? I mean, it seems ridiculous.
But if you look at my old constituency, Staines High Street, if you want to open up, there should be some sort of degree of local control over those sort of operations.
A lot further afield than just cosmetic surgery in terms of local control of what can be opened up on local high streets. So cosmetic surgery is a massive problem, but it might be something that we come to as we go through discussion. But betting shops are a bigger problem too. So
just crowbar that in.
I would not go to a betting shop to have a cosmetic. I think it's a real mistake.
That might be a red flag, Ed.
It's a
That might
real
be a
mistake.
red flag. Maybe putting a bet on whether the cosmetics procedure would go well or not would be another.
Can you imagine?
You mentioned
cup of tea, bet, and a butt lift.
Yeah, why not, eh?
It's a package.
But you mentioned the betting, obviously. Presumably it's because what Gordon Brown has been saying, and that sort of leads into we've got a big discussion now. Essentially, it's in all the papers, of course, about, look, I've been away for 3 weeks, and sometimes you come back and you think, what's changed?
Yep.
Because you sort of switch off a little bit and you come back. And the headline, Keir Starmer refuses to rule out tax rises. That's been going on. I mean, but now it's broadened out into all the manifesto pledge, essentially. Will they be breaking a manifesto pledge in the October budget? He has said, in his quote from yesterday, I think he was in Milton Keynes yesterday, saying he's sure that the October budget will leave people feeling better off. But if you read the headlines, which people is he talking about? Who is going to feel better off?
So we've been talking about this all year. And even with the budget last year, we were saying that they put up the national insurance on employers, and we were saying that if growth didn't happen this year, then there'd be a black hole and taxes would have to go up. And that's exactly what's happened. And what he's going to have to do is essentially raise taxes, but trying to keep within the manifesto pledge.
We were discussing this at length yesterday with Nels and with Andrew Pearce, trying to see if it was possible to do that. I mean, the context today is the Bank of England is expected to cut interest rates. Why are they doing that? Because the economy ground to a halt in the spring because of world events, the Trump tariffs, growth lower.
I would argue because of high taxes as well.
But certainly the world has not helped.
Part of it,
But of course, there's an argument about whether or not Rachel Reeves's national insurance rise also contributed. The reality is, though, slower growth, expected to have a bigger deficit. The government at the moment is looking at a budget where all experts are saying, is the tax rise going to be 20, 30, 40, 50 billion pounds a year we had yesterday from the National Institute? It doesn't feel to me at the moment that when Keir Starmer was doing the interviews yesterday, he's got anything to say about it yet. He's not explaining to us what is happening and why we've got
there has
these
to be a
huge
narrative.
problems.
You're right. I mean, he has to say, and you've effectively done that for him. You've said that, look, the international situation is much more unstable. With the tariffs, the economy is slowing. The opposition will say it's because of the budget last year, partly because of the higher taxes. But you're right, they've got to fund one way or the other. They've got to try and fund, as I say, 30 to 50 billion.
And as a former Chancellor, I mean, finding a billion is easy. Finding 2 is harder.
And the point...
Finding 10 is hard. Finding 50 billion a year is like massive.
And they put up taxes 40 billion last year. So that's a big problem. Anyway, Nels is straining at the leash.
It's time for a wealth tax. And there's never been a greater opportunity to sell it. It would prove popular. 75% of the population are in favour of it. It would impact 0.04% of the population, meaning 40 out of every 1,000 people. And it would be a tax above 10 million.
We can test above
10 million.
So we can test our conversation of yesterday.
Please?
Yesterday, Nels said we can do a wealth tax.
Yes.
And we could end up, 10, 20, 24
billion,
pounds.
yes.
I said,
Conservative.
In my experience, every chancellor, Labour and Conservative, who've looked at this have found it incredibly difficult to introduce a wealth tax because of the practicalities and what the impact it would have. And even if you were doing it, you might be in the small billions, but getting to 10 or 20 billion. And we have a former chancellor here. You were only there for 33 days, but there was
38.
38.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Anyway. Look, so in terms of wealth...
No, but the point is, you looked at this, didn't you?
I never would
look
look at a wealth tax. The problem with wealth taxes now is that, in the 70s you had very high tax and it was income tax, it wasn't a wealth tax. And even then you had people leaving the country. The problem with the wealth tax today in 2025 is that the wealth is so much more mobile. The rich people in this country are so much more international. Most of them, in fact, aren't even British. And the problem is they would go immediately and they're not paying any tax at that point. So the actual predicted or projected number that you'd get in terms of the wealth tax would be much lower, and you'd have a knock-on effect in terms of lower... That's the argument,
the front of the FT, company directors' exodus.
That's the
gathering
problem.
pace after non-dom tax breaks. They're saying that from last October's budget to last month's, 3,790 directors have left the UK, which is essentially that drain.
Which is the point I would make.
Company director is a very broad term. So I read that in multiple newspapers so far. I think the term of company director is very broad. Many of us in this room are going to be coming directors.
But the general point remains the same.
This isn't like this isn't like FTSE 100 leaders who are all flooding out of the country. These could just be people who are freelancers or...
But the point remains, the general point remains the same.
But the point also about this too is that we can't be broke in perpetuity. And then the Gini coefficient, I mean, the gap between wealthy and poor in this country just continues allowed to grow and grow and grow. And then we are not going after that wealth under the concept in which they would flee. We have to sometimes put things to test. And if people are going to flee, let them flee either way.
In terms of the wealth tax, so that you make a point. So the way in which most governments, I think, approach a wealth tax would be the form of what's been called a mansion tax. So you'd essentially might have a tax on property, and I know that the Treasury have looked at that over some years. And the idea of that is that you'd pay maybe 0.5% every year on the value of your property over a certain amount. It might be a 1.5 million.
Not 10 million.
It might be whatever. There'll be a threshold.
I should tell you, Nels is quite ambitious on this.
Yeah.
But the take today...
So are patriotic millionaires. So is the group patriotic millionaires.
Nothing's stopping them from giving more money.
But many of them already do.
To take it back to today's events, Bank of England expected to cut interest rates today. Are they cutting interest rates for good reasons or for bad reasons?
I think
is this good news or bad news?
I think it's good news, obviously, for mortgage holders. But the problem that you have is that they're doing it because there's a general economic slowdown. And if there's an economic slowdown, the Treasury, the government will look to raise more money in tax. And I think that'll have a knock-on effect on growth. I think the more you tax people, the less incentivised they are to work, to start businesses, to embark on wealth creation.
Yes, and what links into this, of course, is... where the government is under pressure again on the universal credit two-child benefit cap.
Absolutely.
And Gordon Brown has spoken about this. He's very passionate about the fact that, particularly under a Labour government, child poverty must not be going up. It's an absolutely abhorrent situation, under any government, of course. But he particularly feels, for a Labour government, this would be a terrible stain on their report card. Let's just listen, because you mentioned betting shops earlier, and that is in relation to Gordon Brown, who has said, why not increase tax on gambling shops and all the gambling industry? Good. And he says people would not be taking to the streets to protest against that. Let's just listen to his quote.
So Rachel Reeves has got to find 10, 20, 30, 40 billion pounds to deal with the deficit.
Sure. But
separately, Gordon Brown is saying for child poverty to rise under a Labour government would be so bad that a gambling tax on online betting would be one way to take away that two-child limit and therefore stop that child poverty rise. Is he right?
he's bang on the money. I want to illustrate something for you, because this is also a story of the Labour Party too. Because I live in I live in an area in North London that is a borough in North London that called Haringey. It's split down the middle by a high street. On one side is actually fairly wealthy and fairly wealthy and what I would describe as monochromatic, and the other side is actually fairly economically diverse and racially diverse too at the same side. One side has about 5 betting shops across the whole half of the borough. The other side has nearly 90. And what you'll then see, Dawn Butler, bless her, has actually been raising this situation over here. It's a Labour-controlled borough on both sides. But what we are actually seeing here is that the blight that these things are able to actually impose upon poor, economically impoverished communities is massive. And I feel that if we can go on the high street or so in poor communities and see, I don't know, 5 betting shops by just turning your neck around or so, then there's clearly immense profits in them. And that profits has to be taxed. It's almost like a sin tax or so, because these organisations, they don't really provide anything of any benefit to the community, but they, perhaps you could argue employment, but it's quite limited in the way how many people they employ. But at the exact same time, too, they are taking so much. These are misery dens, and they're highly profitable, too. And it must be a point where in these sorts of moments that these sorts of institutions, where we need to raise money, they are low-hanging fruit. So Gordon Brown, bless him, is 100% right.
And is it right to spend the money on tackling child poverty rather than getting the deficit down?
Because those places are pipelines for poor children. The poor children of today are the people you'll see lounging in the betting shop tomorrow.
With the gambling industry is that a lot of this, probably most of it, is now going online.
Yeah.
So if you're going to tax gambling shops, you've got to actually tax the online betting as well.
I think he means that.
Yeah, you need to do it. But that's tricky.
Actually.
I mean, that's a trickier thing to be able
Why
to gather.
Why is it
Because
tricky?
you'd have to, get pretty good software, knowing exactly where these bets are. It's much more mobile. It's much more challenging than
As we've been discussing, people are using VPNs to give the impression their identity is happening outside the country.
Exactly, they could pretend that they're in Italy or wherever. It's a trickier situation than just having a betting shop, you know, on Seven
Governments
Sisters Road.
do tricky things all the time.
No, but it costs money. I mean, it's not something that you can just snap your fingers and do very easily.
There comes a point where we have to have this almost bullish approach toward these things and be determined that, look, we are in a situation where economically we're giving the impression, it's almost like economically we're offering people a sense of no hope whatsoever, that they're going to be the nation that we're declining into a poorer and poorer nation on a day-to-day basis. And that's why if you're high potential or with any form of potential, you're going to quickly flee and go somewhere else, go to UAE. So there comes a point where we have to turn the ship around and create some degree of fairness in this society. Going after gambling betting shops is a low-hanging fruit.
So the actual underlying
tax is a low-hanging fruit.
The actually underlying policy, when we brought it in, when George Osborne brought in the 2-child cap, that was actually very popular because a lot of people were saying, you know, if people can't afford to have kids, why should the state
pay the 5th, 6th, 7th rising?
But we've pitted people, against children here.
Is there any evidence that it has decreased childbirth in those groups of people who have is there any evidence that it actually worked?
But we need children.
It saved money. Its job wasn't to.
Can I just take us, because we're
social engineering.
Because we're out of time. To Gordon Brown, a former Prime Minister, causing trouble for the current leader. Let me take you to another former Prime Minister, Liz Truss. We've actually had a rather significant thing happen this week.
What happened?
Which was that Kemi Badenoch last Sunday decided, for the first time actually, to have a pop at Liz Truss.
So she's had it before. She's done them before.
Well, Mel Stride had done it before. I think Kemi Badenoch is new.
It was Mel.
She had always been a bit more cautious. So the leader of the Conservative Party said that the danger was Rachel Reeves was making even bigger mistakes than Miss Truss and had not learned the lessons of her mini-budget, I have to say your mini-budget, Kwasi. Then Liz Truss hit back and said that this was a spurious narrative, diverting from the real failure of 14 years of Conservative government in which her supporters are particularly implicated. Kemi Badenoch has now hit back again today, saying that Liz Truss was to blame for huge overspending by the last Tory government, profligate COVID spending. Is Kemi Badenoch right to turn her fire not on simply Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, but on Liz Truss and the mini-budget?
And what we did.
And what you did.
So I think that she's a new leader, so she has to say what went wrong. She has to distance herself in some way from what happened, because, you know, we got voted out. She's come into the leadership of the Tory party. We've got 121 MPs the lowest ever.
It'll go lower.
So she has to distinguish herself.
Liz Truss is fighting back and accusing Kemi Badenoch of profligacy.
Yeah,
you aren't fighting back.
And the two...
Are you repeating what Liz Truss
No, the
said?
problem that we've got, or that Kemi Badenoch has, is that if it becomes a sparring match, a kind of ding-dong battle between Kemi Badenoch in one corner and Liz Truss in another, I don't see how that helps the party. I don't see how that is
Sort
a
of
good,
blue-on-blue
a good
fire.
example, a good model for taking the party forward. That's what the problem is. I know the two personalities; they're both combative personalities, and they're gonna engage in argy-bargy. But that's not going to help the Conservative Party.
You wouldn't want to be caught in the middle.
No, you shouldn't be. And actually, I was surprised that Liz made a direct attack on the leader. You know, the leader has to distance herself from what happened. She's got to take the party into the future. And what the party doesn't need is a kind of soap opera battle between these two women.
Liz Truss has been threatening to sue. So Liz Truss has been threatening to take legal action against the Prime Minister, even if you continue to accuse her of actually destroying the economy. But both of you are doing so. So look, I feel that if this...
I'm not suing anyone.
No, you're not. No,
I'm not suing anyone.
Not
I mean,
Liz
you're the
Truss,
opposite.
Your former
You're
boss.
being magisterial.
You are being,
No,
actually.
but
You are
the
being quite
thing,
big.
but also what I didn't understand about that is that you can't sue for people saying stuff in Parliament. I mean, there's privilege of Parliament. So if he can say whatever he wants.
So what? If he said outside of Parliament that Liz Truss destroyed the economy.
But that's the pointlessness of it, because it gets reported in Parliament. And so what happens
We can
out of
certainly
Parliament
say
is
that
irrelevant.
Kwasi is handling this differently to Liz Truss.
Yeah, of course, that's fair to say.
Well,
that's reason, but handling with some degree of majesty.
Let's
And credit
get
to him.
through a couple of other... We've only got a few minutes left, so let's get a couple of other things. The GMC, General Medical Council, says that 1 in 5 doctors that they questioned said that they are considering quitting being a doctor in the UK, that they would rather move abroad. Of course, we had the strike. There are now talks to try and avoid further strikes. But that, of course, is a concern, isn't it? That doctors, A, just think, what's the point of being here? And we've already got vacancies in the NHS for doctors that are not being filled. What's the answer?
And less than a third of doctors joined the strike last weekend on the figures.
Yeah, look, I think the strike was broadly unpopular with many of the doctors, with many of them. And I think, you know, the broader reasons why people are leaving the country. So there's a whole bigger context here, and we don't know enough about the reasons that they're giving for wanting to leave. I mean, I haven't seen the data on that.
Well, it's
because they're treated better. The quote is that doctors who say that they would rather work somewhere else say that they would be treated better.
But that could mean anything.
Elsewhere.
That could mean more pay. That could be better conditions. That could be better social
and pay is a big
regard, social acceptance.
The pay of NHS staff, of doctors in particular, or so, has been cut massively. Doctors were some of the people who bore the brunt of the austerity of the Osborne, Sunak, Kwarteng, and however many other chances we had austerity years during that time or so. They bore the brunt of it. They are
austerity in COVID. We spent billions, hundreds of billions.
Yeah, you were drunk and sailors.
I have to say, Kwarteng austerity is not how it's normally referred to.
Okay, absolutely. But the key thing about it here is that it's fair and right and proper for the doctors finally to actually stand up and say, look, our pay has been cut in real time. In real
29%, though.
Yeah, but
So you're saying the strike is working for the doctors?
I would say the strike is essential, that sometimes you have to actually
That wasn't
fight
an answer to the
these
question.
things.
Is the strike working for the doctors?
I think, well, we'll see as time goes on.
I wonder whether that's a question you could ask AI.
I have no idea where you're going here, Ramsey.
The local MP who has decided to use AI to answer constituents' questions.
This feels like a very, very risky game, don't you think?
It feels like yes.
I wouldn't have advised it. Goodness knows.
That's right. Because what's happened is that they do this in banks, which is much narrower.
Yeah.
As an MP, you're going to get an infinite number of questions on all sorts of things. And the bot, I don't know, you can't predict what they're going to say.
But do you own the answers, or is it the bot? Do you know what I mean? If you say they should be, deported from my constituency immediately, or something terrible, is that you saying it, or is it
the
AI?
MP will distance themselves.
How?
As soon as anything like that happens,
but they put it out there.
They will distance
I mean, he
themselves.
owns this bot.
He does, but the politicians are wily enough to be able to distance
It's
themselves.
also weird, I think, if you're asking a question, would you feel completely fobbed off by AI? Because what you really want is an answer from the human being.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's the wrong. I think it's gone the round.
We are being told we have to go. This is so interesting. We'll see you again later.
Hold on to that nugget.